In John chapter 9, we have a story told to us about happenings with Christ and a blind man. And in verse 5 it says, "As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Jesus makes that claim in verse 5, and he proves that claim by a mighty miracle. We know that Christ is always, ever the light of the world. John 8 and verse 12 tells us that when he says, Jesus spoke to them again, saying, "I'm the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life." We read in John chapter 9 this story again of the healing of this man. We'll start out, we're going to look at the first 12 verses of this chapter. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, "Is this not he who sat and begged?" Some said, "This is he." Others said, "He is like him." He said, "I am he." Therefore they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" He answered and said, "A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received my sight." Then they said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." This was not someone that was going blind. This wasn't someone who had recently lost his sight. This was a man who was born blind. And since he was born blind, the miracle was even greater. Like Job's friends, these people in verse 2, they thought that behind every physical affliction was a sin. Remember back in Job where his friends were telling him, "What have you done? You must have sinned for all of these things to happen." And that's what people immediately went to that we see in this section. But God had a plan for this man. God allowed us to have defects, to have problems. And here we see that defect and that problem being used so that Christ could manifest himself, so that Christ could show who he was. This man was an opportunity to work, opportunity to show who he was, to show his power. We need to remember that our time is short and we need to do things. We need to be busy. We need to be working. Jesus could have only willed the man cured and it would have been done. He could have just said, "Be clean," and he'll be done. But instead, he doesn't. Why? Why would we think that Christ would do something like this? Well, for one thing, it's to test the man's faith, right? Put the clay on his eyes, give him instructions, tell him to go do something, to tell him to go, do that washing, to do something. And the blind man does that. He goes and he does what is instructed of him. The blind man promptly obeys. He doesn't do like what Naaman did when he was told what he needed to do. He doesn't get upset. Think about it. This man could have very easily gotten upset with, "Oh, what are you putting on my eyes?" I don't know about y'all, but spit clay probably wouldn't have been the first thing I'd go putting on my face. Something like that, something that maybe some of us would have considered gross or some of us wouldn't have done. And this man goes and he obeys and he washes himself in the pool and he immediately gets his sight. A few lessons here. There was no power in the water in the pool of Siloam. The power was of the Lord. But the man had to go do something in order to receive his sight. He had to go wash in that water. Those actions were required. You know, people say, well, y'all just believe in water salvation when there really isn't any power in the water. Well, no, there isn't power in the water. It's in us doing the actions to be baptized that's important. Us following the commands given by our Lord. But imagine the change in this man's life when he receives his sight. The things that he couldn't see, the things that he didn't know what they looked like. Sun, trees, houses. But what about, most interestingly, people that he had heard for years? People he had talked to for years that he now can see. But having our eyes open to spiritual understanding is so much more important. And it was to this man as well. We need to understand that our eyes need to be opened. We need to see what Christ is offering us. We need to follow his commands. Verse 9. We see here that some said, this is he. Others said, he is like him. He said, I am he. Look at the courage, though, of this man. Because you already have people questioning. You already have people starting to cause maybe some problems for him. But he says, no, this is me. You know that he had to have some faith because he went and he washed. He did the things he was told to do. Now think about this where they say, where is he? Where is this Jesus? And he says, I do not know. Think about, this man doesn't know what Jesus looks like. This man doesn't know how to pick Jesus out of a crowd. He's never seen him before. He doesn't know who he is. So a lot of people will question sometimes where he says here, I do not know. Well, he didn't know who he was. He had heard his voice only. He didn't know what he looked like. Continuing on, verses 13. They brought him, who formerly was blind, to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he received his sight. He said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? There was division among them. They said to the blind man again, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? He said he is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. So the Pharisees are telling people that Jesus is an imposter, and if anyone had confessed him, they would be put out of the synagogue. That's what they've been doing up until this point. Being cut off from the religious and social life of a Jewish person. But Jesus' miracles spoke louder than anything they could say or they could do. Think about the Pharisees here. All people who are from God, this is their argument, all people who are from God keep the Sabbath. This man, Jesus, doesn't keep the Sabbath because he spit in the ground and made clay out of the soil. Therefore, this man's not from God. Think about this line of reasoning. Problem with the Pharisees was they regarded their own hair-splitting Sabbath regulations as the law of God. They had made up their own regulations as to how, what working on the Sabbath meant. They'd come up with their own quote-unquote religion, their own commandments. And they were using it to convict. Well, then you see in verse 17, they said to the blind man, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? And he says he is a prophet. So he actually gives a more profound confession than he did back in verse 11. Because he says, he's now a prophet. Where previously he had just said a man named Jesus. He's professing more about Christ. His faith has been fulfilled. Think about verse 18. Now he says, but the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. Verse 19, and they asked them, saying, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age, ask him, he will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So, I don't know, what do they think, that we switched beggars? And that's what they're trying to do. This isn't him. This can't be him. This isn't that man that was there. They all knew who he was. They all knew the man that was there begging. But they're trying to say, no, it's not the same one. So they bring in the parents and they say, is this your son? Was he born blind? How does he see? The parents here had a chance to openly confess Jesus. They answer the first question honestly, but they evade the third question. They knew how his eyes were open. They had the testimony of their son, but they would not confess it because of fear. A couple of lessons here. We do not want to follow the course of least resistance. Sometimes we are intimidated. Sometimes we are pressured to take that course of least resistance, to take the easy way out. Let's not do it. We need to stand for God. We need to make sure that we stand up and say, yes, I am God's. Yes, I believe in Jesus. Yes, I am a Christian. So many times we don't do that. And here these parents are intimidated enough that they don't. Well, continuing on, verses 24 through 34. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered and said, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. Then they said to him again, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Then they reviled him and said, you are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from. The man answered and said to them, Why, this is a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered and said to him, you were completely born in sins, and are you teaching us? And they cast him out. The one thing that this man knew was that Jesus had healed him. He had been blind and now he could see. And they're trying to entangle him in his talk. They're trying to justify themselves here. He knew they wouldn't listen to him. He didn't give them the chance to get tied up into this mess. He didn't give them that opportunity. He was not afraid of them like his parents was. You know, this is one of those times in scriptures, to me, it's a little bit humorous. You know, I told you already, you didn't listen. You want to hear it again? Do you want to be one of his disciples? You know, you've already asked. I'm not going to play word games with you. I'm not going to, run around the merry-go-round with you. I'm not going to answer this. They would not admit defeat. They would not concede to their error. You know, the miracle plainly revealed who Jesus was. God would not have heard him if he was a sinner. God would not have given him the power if he was a sinner. Oh, here's another one of their reasoning here. Only people who are from God can open the eyes of one born blind. Jesus opened the eyes of one born blind. Jesus is from God. But they didn't want to accept that. I mean, if you use their same reasoning, that's exactly what you just saw. Sinners cannot open the eyes of one born blind. Jesus opened the eyes of one born blind. Jesus is not a sinner. If we use that same reasoning they were trying to use, that's what you get. But then in verse 34, you have their reaction to the reasoning. People that are so prejudiced they could not be reasoned with. They couldn't uncover any kind of fraud with this miracle. They couldn't find anything wrong with it. So what do? They find a way around it to cast it off. They were so proud that they would not listen to the wisdom of this common man. In John chapter 7, verses 45 through 49, then the officers came to the chief priests and Pharisees, who said to them, "Why have you not brought him?" The officers answered, "No one ever spoke like this man." Then the Pharisees answered them, "Are you also deceived? Have any of the rulers or the Pharisees believed in him? But this crowd that does not know the law is accursed." Look at the way they look down on the people. And that's what they're doing to this man. Look at you. You're nothing. You don't know anything. You're not one of us learned men. You're not one of us in power. You're not one of us that should know these things. And look how you're talking to us. Even though he was reasoning well and being truthful. So what did they do? They discarded him. They sent him out. They got rid of him. Because somebody like him couldn't know anything. Let's look at the last part of this, verse 35. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. When he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind." Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, 'We see,' therefore your sin remains." You know, Jesus here is mindful of this man. And he asks him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" Look at the blind man's answer. Who is he? And as soon as he knows who he is, he immediately stands firm and says yes. Jesus tells his twofold purpose here. Those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Bringing knowledge to those who need it, but also condemning those who need it as well. And we have people in this world that we need to point out that they're wrong, just like Jesus did. But then we also need to bring the gospel to people who truly need to hear it. If you will admit that you are blind and you are in sin, you will be forgiven. But look at the attitude of these Pharisees. We know better. And they didn't. You know, a wonderful chapter and a wonderful story, but we learn what kind of character we have. We can be like the Pharisees. We can be blinded by tradition. You know, you look at examples of the man at the pool of Bethesda, the man with the withered hand, the woman that was bowed over. You look at all of these acts that were done that they wouldn't believe. That they had to criticize. They had to find some reason because they were blinded by their tradition and they had closed minds. Their minds were already made up about Christ. They were not going to listen. They weren't going to do anything. Why? Because they had their minds made up already. How many times do we make up our minds on something way too early? And they were also full of pride. Pride will be our downfall. So we can be like those Pharisees Or we can be like the parents. We can be a people that are influenced by men. We can be a people that take the easy way out. And we can be the people that submit to pressure, follow the wishes of others instead of doing what God says. Or we can be like the blind man who was obedient. He had faith in the power of Jesus. He honestly looked at the evidence. He took a strong stand in the face of opposition. And he now had the light of life. We too can have the light of life. As we see in John 8, verse 12, Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Which one of these individuals are we going to be? Let's make the right choice. If there's anything we can do for you, please come as we stand and sing.